The original PlayStation has what I consider to be the most interesting game library on any console ever. It's an eclectic mix of 2D and 3D, traditional genres and wild experiments, blockbusters, and obscurities that years later would result in the making of Elden Ring. To celebrate the system's 30th anniversary, here's a selection of some of my personal favorites. XV. VIII Ribbon is a rhythm game stripped to a wireframe rabbit walking on a scraggly line. It's extremely simple. Just press the buttons associated with the different shapes. But be ready for the simplicity to break your brain. VIII Ribbon is a minor masterpiece of minimalism that both charms and infuriates. And the over-caffeinated pop soundtrack that goes along with it is one of a kind. 14. Ghost in the Shell on the PS1 is probably not what you expect, and that's what makes it memorable. It's 50% shooting cyberpunk robots to a sick techno soundtrack and 50% something that doesn't really have a name, but what I'm going to call sticky 360 degrees platforming. You know it when you see it, and this is pretty much the only place to see it. I'm aware that it's kind of a B game, but sometimes cozying up with some prime B-grade stuff is just the best, you know? 13. Crash Bandicoot as a character is a bit much for me these days, but I can't deny the times I've replayed Crash 2. Some people prefer the third game, but for my taste, it doesn't have enough of the main course, which is platforming. Crash 2 is all about the juicy running and jumping. Its flow reminds me of the Donkey Kong Country games, in that it's both about learning the levels well enough that you can breeze through them in an almost uninterrupted motion, and figuring out devious secrets. Crash 2 excels in this double whammy. 12. I've never been good at fighting games, but even I can appreciate the style and smoothness of Tekken 3. There's just something about this particular roster and the fluidity of movements that captivates the mind, that makes me want to try and chain Xiaoyu's rain dances and phoenix dances into something resembling martial arts. Also, it just needs to be said that Namco wasn't far with their intros on the PS1, and this one is no exception. 11. It's tough to choose between the second and the third Wipeout game on the console. The second one has Prodigy's Firestarter, but I feel like the third one is a more cohesive package, with the visuals, the soundtrack, and the tracks coming together in a very satisfying way. It's a slightly hazier, but not any slower take on Wipeout, and the contributions of the Designers Republic remind us of the power in collaborating with creative minds outside of the video game sphere. 10. Aquanaut's Holiday is the earliest game that I know of that I would call a walking simulator, even if technically you don't do any walking. Just look at it with your heart and not your eyes, okay? The game lets you explore a huge underwater area at your leisure, with a beautiful soundscape and an atmosphere that ranges from mysterious to spooky to relaxing. This is a holiday from the stuffy, narrow notions of what video games should be. 9. Kaze no Notam carries the ethos of Aquanaut's Holiday further still. You're tasked with piloting a hot air balloon, the most uncontrollable means of transportation out there. Surrendering to the winds, you learn to enjoy the process. Enjoy the aesthetics that are unfiltered vaporwave years before that stuff appeared from the depths of the internet. This game soared freely before the rest of us even knew that taking to the air was an option. 8. The first 2 hours or so of Metal Gear Solid are so dense with content it's ridiculous. You're bombarded with cool cutscenes, plot twists, miniature stealth sandboxes, fourth wall breaking puzzles. I mean, almost Easter egg-like attention to detail. The second half fails to sustain this momentum, with the game clearly being padded out for length, but what an opening. 7. Gradius Gaiden is a spiritual sequel to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, just in the form of a shooter game instead of a Metroidvania. This is peak pixel graphics, with a luscious soundtrack to go with the visuals. It's just pure classic 2D action goodness. 6. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a spiritual prequel to Gradius Gaiden, just in the form of a Metroidvania instead of a shooter game. This is peak pixel graphics, with a luscious soundtrack to go with the visuals. It's just pure classic 2D action goodness. But seriously, I'm not a huge fan of the combat in this game, but it's just such a joy to explore, and the aesthetics are simply divine. Also, it does have that famous line. Hey, wait a minute. Okay, here we go.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. How about you?
5. In my restless dreams, I see those Dutch angles and dither-to-heck polygons of Silent Hill, appearing fully formed all at once, as if it was no big deal to come up with this particular mix of American and Japanese horror. Like Metal Gear Solid, it's full to bursting. There's the miniature open world of the iconic town, the openness to interpretation, the dentist's drill of Akira Yamaoka's music. A part of me will never leave Silent Hill. 4. Final Fantasy VIII is a game developer drunk on fame and money doing whatever it wants, while inadvertently overturning half of the furniture in the room. There's a lot of stuff here that doesn't quite work or make much sense, but there's an infectious sense of freedom and beauty as well. You can break the battle system, if you want to. You can spend hours playing Triple Triad, if you want to. You can just hang out and admire the views, if you want to. Final Fantasy VIII makes you want to want. It has the soul of a teenager. 3. Final Fantasy VII has the most resonant themes I've encountered in a Japanese RPG. It's a game about living in an age of climate crisis caused by corporate greed. It's a game about how fake it till you make it can just as often break it, the it here being you. It's also just a grand adventure, an odyssey through the full spectrum of emotions. Dead serious, dead humorous. Final Fantasy VII is magic. 2. When I want to play a PS1 game, it's not necessarily because I think those games are better than what we have now, it's because I want to experience the flavor of a past era. Since the past is like a foreign country, they do things differently there. For me, Ridge Racer Type 4 is the epitome of the optimism felt at the turn of the millennium. This is not a racing game. This is what Tatsuro Yamashita means when he sings of, quote, "Sparkle in my heart, wonder in the world." This is Namco, the kings and queens of PS1 style at their apex. 1. Boku no Natsuyasumi is the closest that this era of video games came to creating something comparable in storytelling to the great works of literature and film, while still being a fully interactive video game. It's a celebration of the beauty of everyday life, a meditation on childhood nostalgia, and a snapshot of a bygone era combined into one. It inspired me to start learning Japanese, which I guess means it has the highest learning curve I've ever overcome in a video game. It's so good they knew we couldn't handle it, and the passing of years has only underlined its uniqueness. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see some of your faves in the comments.